A shadow increase on the demand of exotics is coming. So what makes something rare in a game like this? It all boils down to supply and demand. In the Division 2, exotic components are not just rare, they're the rarest material in the game. They're highly sought after because they're essential for increasing your power level with the expertise system and upgrading and tweaking your exotic weapons. And it hasn't been officially confirmed by the devs yet, but in the last PTS, we saw testing for the ability to change the attributes on exotic gear. We can already do this with exotic weapons, so this would be an expansion to our capabilities. So it looks like we're gonna get the ability to change exotic gear attributes. That's great news, right? Well, sort of. Let's find out why.
And if you don't know, now you know.
Whether we will be able to change an attribute or a core can't be confirmed for sure yet. And because the devs are keeping their cards close to their chest, we won't officially know until the season reveal and patch notes. But if I were a betting man, I'd say it's coming. When they introduced the ability to change exotic weapon attributes, it went down the same way it looks like it's going to happen with the exotic gear. For the weapons, we had no upfront details, but did see it in the PTS, followed by a 2-phase rollout of the ability to the live servers. The first was on a limited set of exotic weapons. The second phase opened it up to the rest. Am I excited about it? Absolutely. We have some really cool exotic gear that sometimes doesn't synergize with the type of build we pair it up with, or the stat on the exotic just doesn't make any sense. Whatever the case, although this won't likely make or break a build, when you combine this change with other things like the expertise system and the ability to change exotic weapon attributes, the power gap is going to just feel a little bit smaller in our gameplay. Yes, I think it will be enough for a player to notice. But here's the bad news. That giant stockpile of exotics you needed to stay competitive, it just got bigger. Exotic components are not something you can farm in mass quantities. They're hard to come by, mostly requiring players to dismantle exotic weapons or gear, which in itself is intended to be a rare drop. Otherwise, we're able to grind for exotic caches and exotic components from the countdown game mode, projects, and the like. What I'm saying is that ultimately it means you can't just grind out a bunch of exotic components in a short amount of time. Each one you acquire feels like a significant achievement. It really does. So with the exotic components being so scarce, the rate at which you consume them for upgrades and attribute changes far exceeds how quickly you can collect them. And now, with the potential new update, exotic components will also be needed to change attributes on exotic gear. This adds another layer of demand, making these components even more valuable. Every time you want to tweak your gear or weapons, you'll be dipping into your stash of exotic components, depleting them quickly. And when it comes to changing an attribute on an exotic, it's a game of chance based on the RNG system. You can get lucky and only need to spend a few exotic components to get your preference, or you could burn your whole stash. It's up to the big guy. So when we say something is rare in this context, we're not talking about an item that is hard to come by, but also highly desired by players. The rarity isn't just about how often the item drops in the game. It's also about how essential it is for progression and customization. As the demand for these components increase due to their multiple uses, their rarity becomes even more pronounced. So in essence, the rarity of exotic components comes from a combination of their limited supply and their high demand. You can't farm them in bulk, and every time you use one, you're consuming a precious resource that takes a significant effort to replace. This scarcity makes planning and strategic use of exotic components crucial for any dedicated player in the Division 2. All right, listen up. I'm not trying to beat it over and over with the negative stick, but let me just squeeze in a little more reality for you. This is important because it was overlooked due to the community's excitement when they rolled out the system for the exotic weapons last time. So using the exotic weapons as an example, before they rolled out the update for the capability to change the attributes, the secondary attribute subject to change was fixed, meaning it was always the same. No matter how many times you got that exotic to drop, like the Mantis for example, it always came with damage to targets out of cover. Get it 10 times, all 10 exotics will have the same damage to targets out of cover there in that slot, which is great because the fixed attribute is best in slot for that weapon. But once the change went live, all exotic secondary attributes for weapons became a variable on drop. determined by RNG, the big guy. Due to the possibilities available for that slot, the rarity level on the Mantis just went up, where before you didn't have to spend exotic components on your Mantis. Now you do, thus a shadow increase on the demand of exotics. Longtime players with all exotics in stash won't be impacted by changes to the legacy exotics as much as the new players will be, but all will be impacted by every exotic in the future, because many of those items could have been provided with the ideal attributes, not requiring exotic components to be invested in them. But now it's possible that we will have to invest exotic components in every single exotic dropped in the game. That's something that has to be thought about. So although on the surface, this looks like great news, and it's something I'm looking forward to because I really do appreciate customizing my builds even further, the reality is the grind just became way more serious than it is now. Those exotic components just became way more essential. The demand on them is greatly increased. Thus, they just became more rare. We need the devs to realize this, and we need more ways to get exotic components. The big question is, will this impact the player-based sentiment towards the game's grind? Absolutely. The way exotic components are set up in the Division 2 can make players feel like they're constantly in debt to the game. You're always on the grind, trying to collect enough of these rare items just to keep up. It's like you're always a step behind, always owing more time and effort just to stay competitive. Think about it. The rate at which you need these components for upgrades and attribute changes is way higher than the rate at which you can actually get them. You use them up so quickly that it feels like you can never catch a break. Every time you manage to get a few components, they're gone before you know it because you're always upgrading something or tweaking your gear. That's one of the major mechanics of the game. Since you can't farm exotic components in bulk, each one you find is incredibly valuable. This means you might feel pressured to spend hours grinding in the game just to gather enough resources. It can definitely create a feeling of being in debt to the system, where you're constantly working to pay off that debt with your time and effort. The scarcity of exotic components in the Division 2 can really affect how players feel about the grind. When you have to spend hours farming for rare items and still don't see much progress, it's easy to get frustrated and burned out. It can start to feel like you're constantly playing catch up, which isn't fun. This grind can make the game feel unfair, especially when the components are so hard to come by, but you need so many of them. Stockpiles, giant piles, and players might start thinking the game is rigged against them, which is a huge turnoff. Let's not talk about the stress of using these components wisely. Every decision feels high stakes because you don't want to waste your hard-earned materials. I can't be alone on this one. Anybody else out there feel like that? This can make the game more stressful than enjoyable because you don't want to waste them on subpar upgrades. And when you see that everyone in the community is struggling with the same issue, it reinforces that sense of being in a never-ending cycle of trying to catch up. Over time, all this can sap your motivation. If you feel like you're not making any real progress, you might lose that drive to keep playing. And when a lot of players start feeling this way, it can create a negative atmosphere in the entire community. People will talk about how frustrating the grind is, and that negativity can spread, making even more players unhappy because they start noticing. But it doesn't have to be this way. Developers can introduce more ways to earn exotic components, like special events or daily missions. Imagine double exotic component weekends or something like that. They could also balance the number of components needed for upgrades so it matches better with how quickly you consume them. I know they just did this to the expertise system with Project Resolve, but by adding another system that consumes them, that demands them, I think all the systems need another look, including the systems that deliver exotic components, like projects. Well, with the situation being what it is, let me just make sure you're in the best position you can be in for next season. So I created a whole guide on how to prepare for seasons, but one of the big things is mules, and that's why I'm bringing it up because somebody was just saying in chat that he just created his first mule, and it is so important. I mean, it takes 4 to 5 hours to create a mule and is the absolute most important thing you could ever do in the Division 2. Sad. I know that's a lame thing to say, but it is true. I'll stand by that. It's the fastest way to any resource, including exotics, because you're gonna get access to more projects. But again, stash space is the most limited resources we have, the rarest. And so you're gonna at least want to make sure you expand that, and then you get all the passive income too. By leveling up one character, I'm leveling up all my characters. Better way to say that is I'm getting 3 times the output from my experience. And what I mean by output is like, what we do with our experience points is we use our watch to buy my resources. So I level up this character 1 SHD, and then all my other mules watches go up by 1.2. In total, 4 scavenger points I can use for resources, which is all going into expertise and optimization and crafting, whatever you need. And so resources are no longer ever an issue for me. And I don't think they ever are going to be. The reality is that you don't need expertise. I'm plenty powerful without it. But, you know, it's the latest thing to be grinding for. The only thing that holds me back from that, from everything being level 25, is exotic components. Literally. And the devs thought through that pretty smartly because there's no way around it. There's no single method that covers all your bases. So not even Countdown will give you all the resources you need because you need optimization, recon data. So farming for expertise system requires a multi-prong approach. You have to do open world stuff, you have to use Countdown stuff, you have to do projects, but there's always gonna be a bottleneck. And for me, well, I don't know if it's a lucky thing, but the downside is that that bottleneck is exotic components, which ends up happening to be the rarest and most difficult thing to farm in mass because you can't buy them with watch points. So Countdown remains the best way to get exotics on an exotics per hour basis, mostly from the Countdown requisitions, which are basically credits you can spend at the Countdown vendor. So that is the best way. But global events provide an additional way, and the reward tracks are basically free. Because the downside about Countdown, it's a group mode, and not everybody wants to run with 8 players all the time. Or do you? And exotic caches are expensive, so it should really be a collection of processes if you really want to amass exotic components. I wouldn't heavily rely on any single method because you'll lose your mind out of boredom. And so for me, my favorite way is, of course, my XP farm build. I'm doing these projects and which they're going to give me, this is going to give me 3 exotics components right here. That's huge. And it's extremely easy to do it even with all 5 directives. So I'm also leveling up all of my mules and getting passive income, or in other words, unlimited resources. And you have your daily project acquisition, your weekly legendary. And so these really add up. These global events are a great way to add to your exotic component farming. That's basically what I'm doing right now, because you go in here and you can see there's a couple of exotics at the back end, and then also I get these red stars that I can use to buy more exotic caches. Right now, knowing that we have 2, basically less than 3 weeks before the next season starts, which is just around the corner, I mean, you want to be hoarding as many resources as possible. You want to top off all your resources, and mules are going to help you do that, because with the mules, you can go after projects. At least this one, that's a free exotic right there. And if you have 3 mules, that's 3 free exotics every week, and we have 3 weeks to the next season. That's 9 exotics just right there. And obviously you can be doing Countdown and all those other things, but I've been trying to help the community realize the real grind is no longer gear, it's resources, especially exotic components. I mean, they've found a way to turn exotics into the grind of the game. I don't mean a grind, it's always been a grind, but into the grind. Thank you for hanging out with me today. My name is Tuxedo Bandido, and this was another episode of The Division 2. If you found this video helpful, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on the fantastic experiences waiting for you in The Division 2. And if you like builds like this, check out the recommended build video I have here for you. If you have anything you want to see covered, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And thank you to all the channel members and donors who make everything possible. Tux Nation wouldn't be without you.
When you buy a game from Ubisoft, enter the creator code Tuxedo Bandido to support the channel. Easy peasy.
Follow me.
I get it.